Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the ACTOM webinar on renewable energy opportunities for local manufacturers. Before we start, a few webinar considerations. Attendees are reminded to ensure the volume is turned up on your device. Ensure you have a stable internet connection. This will ensure the streaming and audio will run smoothly. Attendees can ask questions via the questions panel located within the GoToWebinar control panel. By default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat function is reserved for webinar organizers and panelists to communicate with attendees. Attendees will not be able to chat with each other, however, are encouraged to ask questions. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel, SAIEE TV, under the Corporate Partnership playlist. This channel is updated regularly, and you will find the registration link in the chat box. Please click on it and register. It's free. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few days after this webinar. I'd like to introduce you now to our host this morning. It's Mr. Chris Yelland. He obtained his Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from the University of Natal in 1976 and was the founder and managing director of EE Publishers, the publishers of Engineer IT, Energize, Vector, and Position IT magazines. After the closure of EE Publishers, Chris started a new company, EE Business Intelligence, to focus on important strategic issues facing the electricity, energy, and ICT sectors in South Africa and the region. Chris is a fellow of the SAIEE, a senior IEEE member, and an IET UK member. He is also a registered chartered engineer with the Engineering Council in the UK. Over to you, Chris.
Good morning, and thanks for the introduction, Minx, and good morning to everybody who's listening in, and of course, good morning to our panelists today. We've got a really interesting discussion today concerning localization and the localization opportunities for South African manufacturers, particularly focusing in the renewable energy sector. And it is a very exciting time. We know about the crisis. We know about the shortages of grid access. We know that we need a lot more generation capacity. And we know that renewable energy has been highlighted, to form the major portion of this new renewable energy and new generation capacity that's got to come on stream. And we've seen also the ACTOM transmission development plan for the next 10 years, and it paints a picture that we need a massive investment in the transmission grid in order to open up the opportunities for connecting new generation to the grid and to connect customers and to ensure that they have a reliable supply. So the investment that is planned is truly massive. If we look to the just energy transition, one's talking, in excess of R1 trillion to ensure a just energy transition. And the new integrated resource plan for electricity, the updated IRP, we think is going to come out, well, maybe by the end of the year, maybe by the end of next year, we don't exactly know. But it also is going to paint a picture of very significant generation capacity. We're all watching to see what technologies are planned, but no doubt renewable energy will form the major portion of this. So we're here today to talk about these opportunities, to talk about also the constraints, challenges ahead, the investments required, and what it takes to be a local manufacturer of some significance in this environment. Now, today we have with us a number of people, 4 presenters, and I'm going to introduce our first presenter, that is Danielle Harding. Now, Danielle is from ED Platform, and she's had several years of experience consulting with IPPs in South Africa's renewable energy landscape to compile compliant and competitive tenders. This work has harnessed her skills in long-term economic development strategy modeling, which focuses on the business core. She's also expanded the skill set into the private PPA market, which is really burgeoning in South Africa. You know, we're experiencing a lot of delays in the public procurement process, and the private PPA market is somewhat more nimble, able to corner some of these opportunities as a result of their speed and flexibility. But to this end, Danielle has also led annual performance audits and ongoing compliance monitoring in her advisory capacity. She provides creative solutions to improving corporate performance, responsibility, uplifting communities, and bolstering local supply chains. So, Danielle, I'm going to give you an opportunity to say 10 minutes speaking time. I'm not going to be too strict on it, but if you can try and limit yourself to 10 minutes to give your thoughts about the environment that we're operating in the renewable energy sector, both public procurements and private PPA procurements, and what this means for local manufacturers and the opportunities arising from this. So over to you, Danielle.
Thank you very much, Chris. Welcome to everybody, and thank you to our hosts as well, to ACTOM, for putting this together and bringing us all together. So I'll speak very briefly about where local content and local manufacturing requirements come from a regulatory perspective, from a policy perspective, and then during the panel discussion we can unpack this a little bit more in terms of what this actually means and how this has manifested in supply chains in South Africa. So as briefly mentioned, we are seeing two major streams of renewable energy generation requirements. That's in the private PPA sector. When we speak about the private sector, we're talking about very large consumers. We're talking about mass industries. We're looking at ports and harbors, the mining sector, etc. And with the current crisis, of course, and thank goodness for nurses relaxing of various regulations, it means a lot of these large energy consumers are now able to generate their own power, which is obviously quite an appealing option for them in terms of their energy consumption. And so they're putting out tenders into the market for the construction and generation and obviously consumption of their own power. The second major stream that we're seeing is still from the Department of Energy. That's in the DMRE's REIPP program. That tender is obviously very much regulated in terms of the triple PFA, and a lot of the regulations stem from the DTIC. So in these two streams, local content is very much an objective that they stipulate. There are minimum thresholds that they'd like to see being achieved. So in the private PPA space, we're seeing stipulations of between 25 to 40% of total capex that they would like to see. That stems from both services provided from South African registered entities, as well as goods that are manufactured in South Africa. In the DMRE space, we're seeing a very similar threshold. They're looking to achieve between 40–45% local content. So both of these requirements do stem from the DTIC. In the private space, it stems more from the BE codes, where a minimum BE level is required on top of these local content requirements. And in the DMRE space, it's obviously stemming from BE codes as well as the triple PFA. So in the triple PFA, there's obviously been some amendments lately. So from 2023, there's new triple PFA codes that have now applied. So you're not seeing that local content as a compliance requirement, but rather a competitive requirement. A lot of that is then circles back to the National Treasury's sector circulars. And within those sector circulars, there are various key components that have been identified, and each of these components have got minimum thresholds for manufacturing in South Africa. So in a nutshell, this is sort of where it stems from. Of course, there are various challenges involved with that. There's a lot of successes that we've seen as well. But in essence, it's important to consider how these requirements flow throughout a supply chain. That is really the key of where you know, where the success lies in achieving these local content requirements. So from the DTIC, from the BBE codes, and also the triple PFA codes, that will flow through the tender requirements, either through the PPA space or in the DMRE space. And those tender requirements flow down through to the project companies, to the SPVs, who are the entities contracting to the tender authorities. But that would then be passed down through to contractors, through to vendors. So you'll see those requirements trickling down through the whole supply chain. And that is really where a lot of the strategy comes from, is looking through the supply chain and really relying on the inputs from contractors and from their subcontractors and suppliers as well. I think I'll leave it at that, and we can unpack those nuances a little bit more in the panel discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Danielle, and you've certainly kept to your time limit well within that, so I appreciate that, because sometimes these things tend to run on, but it gives us more time for the real work, which is going to be the discussion, and then followed by the Q&As from our audience, which is sitting at 97 at the moment. So that's a really great turnout today, and I think it attests to the interest and the business opportunities out there. But now I'd like to introduce our second presenter, who really is focused on localization and the just transition within the electricity sector. And his name is Gaylor Montbasson-Clear. So Gaylor, welcome, and just to introduce him, Gaylor leads TIPS, that's the Trade and Industry PS. I'm wondering what that stands for. Gaynor, can you just read out what TIPS stands for?
Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies.
Aha, Trade and Industry Policy Strategy is excellent. Thank you for that. So Gaylor leads TIPS's work on sustainability and just transitions, and he's the facilitator of the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, SAREM. This is an industrialization plan for South Africa's renewable energy value chain. So this is really right in the middle of what we are talking about today. Gaylor is also a research associate at the University of Johannesburg Center for Competition, Regulation and Economic Development. That's the CCRED. He holds 2 master's degrees and has been working on the green economy issues for over a decade. And he's researched the transition to an inclusive green economy from a developing country perspective, focusing on policy frameworks, industrial development, the just transition, and resource security. So I really don't think we could have a more appropriate presenter on the subject matter today. And Gaylor, I'm going to give you also 10 minutes to introduce yourself and give your opening thoughts on the subject at hand. Over to you, Gaylor.
Thanks so much, Chris, for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to share some thoughts this morning on this really important topic, and certainly something that's keeping me busy and that I work on, as introduced, as the facilitator at the moment of the Renewable Energy Master Plan, SAREM, which is primarily focused on developing industrial value chains in renewable energy and battery storage for the country. So really at the core of that. And when we think about developing, manufacturing capabilities in those value chains in the country at the moment, the first question, I guess, that manufacturers always ask is, well, what's the demand? Is there demand? Can you show me that you've got enough demand? The number always changes, but there seems to be a sweet spot around 1 gig a year, sometimes a bit less, but 4 or 5 years. Can you show me that? And it's a legitimate question, because I think to date, we haven't been able as a country to have that demand to be sustained year after year. We've had some really good years, but we've had some really bad years as well, with no demand. Because of the bubble, in which the market was operating, the bubble of the REAP. And I think as Daniel has introduced now, that bubble has been burst, and we now have two markets. But I think that question is to be answered very positively going forward. If we see what is coming in terms of the demand for renewable energy and battery storage in the coming years, is massive, really massive. You can look at it in various ways. You can look at it obviously from what's coming out of the public procurement, and we still have quite large procurement to come. Remember, over the period of 2022 to 2030, we committed from the government side to procure about 14 gigawatts of renewable energy, and most of that still has to be procured. So there's big procurement coming from the state that will drive anchor demand, really. And those procurement come with very strict localization requirements. And then on the private side, it's really interesting to see what's coming, because we can look at it in almost in three ways. We can see it what's already being channeled through the system, looking at NERSA registration over the last few months. And if we look at the last quarter, first quarter of this year, so 3 months, there was 2.5 gigawatts of projects, of renewable energy projects registered at NERSA. In the whole of last year, it was 1.6 gigawatt. And in the year before that, it was below 100 megawatts. So before that, it didn't really exist, because of course the market has been opened up. The licensing requirements have been opened up first partially in 2021 and now fully in December of last year. So that market is rising quite strongly. We also see it if we look at projects that are sitting at budget quote level with ACTOM. So projects that are asking to be connected to the grid. As of February, we had 13 gigawatts of projects, in excess of 8 gigawatts of solar PV projects and about 5 gigawatts of wind projects asking to be connected to the grid. So that's real projects coming onto the grid in the months and probably 2 years to come. And then we've got the interest. And the interest in the market is massive. If you look at it from the recent grid survey that ACTOM, the industry association, SAIEE and SAIEE did, or from the cost estimate letters that ACTOM issues to prospective project developers, this is sitting around 65 gigawatt. Not all of that will materialize, probably because of grid constraints and other issues, but that shows you the interest. And so for me, that market is critical, and it is really, really rising. We also see that with import data. You look at the imports of panels, of batteries, inverters, wind turbines. It's all, it's like that massive exponential curve now rising. Lithium-ion batteries in the last quarter, over $400 million of imports into the South African economy. Panels, $200 million the last quarter of imports. Massive demand that can be taken up by local manufacturing. Of course, not all of it will be localized, but certainly we see the opportunities and the market to be moving, and that trickles down to the entire value chain effectively. If we look at what we currently localize in our value chains and the level of local content that we can achieve, it's a really interesting picture. Solar and wind, I think we comfortably do 40–45% local content, aligned with some of the requirements, of course, that have been set up. But that is primarily balance of plant, the civil works, the electricals, and a few other things. And for wind, primarily towers. For solars, some models recently, but mostly the structures and then trackers. doesn't extend to the entire value chain. And I think we need to start looking at that. On the battery side, if we look at lithium-ion batteries, manufacturers can do 55–60% already local content. The only thing we can't do in South Africa right now are the battery cells, the lithium-ion battery cells, which are imported out of China. But everything else is made locally, certainly by some manufacturers. If we look at more nascent technologies like vanadium-based batteries, we have one company in the country, and that company can already achieve 80–90% local content actually. So there's already quite a lot that we can do, and there's even more that we can grow. And I think that's where it gets interesting. Certainly we see that module manufacturing on the solar side is a growing opportunity. There's a lot of interest by prospectors, companies reaching out and saying, we see this market grow, we want to invest. We want to see what's possible to make the models, but even to make things that honestly I didn't think were quite possible in the short to medium term. Lots of discussions around cell manufacturing, even discussions around ingots and wafers manufacturing. These are really starting to look like a comprehensive value chain. On the wind side, certainly we can do the towers, we do the towers, we can do the blades, we used to make the blades, we don't make them. Let's grow that industry, see what we can do maybe around the nacelles and the hub manufacturing going forward, although this is more prospective at this point, I think. On the battery side, I said it, there's already a very vibrant industry, so let's move to grow that, and then in time maybe things like cell manufacturing becomes viable. And when we look at cross-cutting opportunities, we've got a lot of existing manufacturing, inverters, cables, switch gears, many services. But the challenge is, of course, it's only servicing a very small part of the market. And so we need to grow those opportunities and see how we go about that. So for me, when I look at the landscape, I see opportunities left, right, and center. And I think now it's about, let's put forward the framework so that investment can materialize. And that's really what SAIEE is about. We need that enabling environment. We need energy security, of course. We need the right policy framework and policy support. We need the ecosystem. Things like testing, certification capabilities, so that manufacturers don't have to ship their product to the EU or US to get them certified. And we need a common interface, something like the Energy One-Stop Shop, for instance. So hoping we can unpack some of that requirement in terms of the policy environment, certainly into the discussion. But hopefully started to flesh out some of the opportunities that we could really leverage in the country, what we have already, and that's what's coming in the pipeline. And then we can get deeper into the policy frameworks and the requirements going forward. So I think let me leave it at this for now as an introduction, and I look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gaylor, for that. And that really does paint a picture of a huge opportunity going forward, driven by demand, predictable demand, and predictable policies, and the enabling requirements, that need to be put in place to really facilitate this. So we're going to have some very interesting discussions further with Gaylor, and I'm making notes as we go, and I would urge all people that are watching, at the moment we have 115 attendees, to please pose your questions on the question and answer facility, because that will help guide me when it comes to the Q&A from the floor. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce to you Casper Zwane. Casbah is the divisional CEO at ACTOM High Voltage. Now, thank you also to ACTOM for facilitating this webinar. I'm not sure if I'm correct in saying this, but I'm told, or I was told a time back, that ACTOM and its group of companies is the largest local manufacturer of electrical equipment in South Africa. Please, Casbah, correct me if I'm wrong on that. Things may have changed in the interim, but I heard that some time ago. But Casbah is, as I say, the divisional CEO of ACTOM High Voltage Equipment. It's a division of ACTOM Pty Limited, which supplies products and services in the electricity transmission and distribution industry. He is an advisory board member at Wits University School of Electrical and Information Engineering. And Casbah has had various roles in the transmission and distribution industry for over 2 decades. In his current role, he's very much involved in the execution of renewable energy projects for all grid-tied projects for the country and for all technologies, wind, solar, battery storage, and hydro throughout Southern Africa, and in fact in other parts of the continent. So it's really interesting to have you on board, and I know we're going to talk a little bit further about the Eskom Transmission Development Plan. I'm sure ACTOM High Voltage, is looking at eagerly as a massive investment opportunity. Eskom has to invest in, lines and substations and transformers and switchgear and all that goes with it. And these represent huge opportunities, and these enable, the connection of these renewable energy wind farms, solar PV farms, battery storage farms, etc. So without the transmission and the high voltage grid, none of this will be possible. So I'm going to now hand over to you, Casbah, for your 10 minutes. Please, can you introduce ACTOM and comment on whether you are still the largest local manufacturer in South Africa? Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Over to you.
Okay. All right, thank you, Chris. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning to the participants of the webinar. And once again, thanks to the ACTOM team for putting this together, and SAIEE for the support in organizing the event. Chris, I think as you've mentioned, there's quite, ACTOM is still the largest electromechanical manufacturer and service provider for the electricity supply industry. Speaking of ACTOM High Voltage specifically, as you've correctly said, we are a manufacturer for the transmission and distribution industry in terms of products, and also, of course, provision of services in that environment. As ACTOM High Voltage, we of course do manufacture or assembly some of the products that we're speaking about that supports the renewable energy industry, where we assemble or manufacture equipment up to about 132 kV currently, and of course on the extra high voltage as well. In collaboration with our technology partners globally, we then partially assemble some of these products, again to support the industry in achieving the local content requirements as stipulated earlier by my colleagues, Gailo and Daniel. I think as ACTOM, and I think as an industry at large, we're seeing opportunity in what's happening. Gailo has sort of put a picture in terms of the demand that is about to come. I think the opportunities then, if we had to sort of touch a little bit on what the opportunities that are coming for us, and then I think for the industry, and maybe the constraints or the challenges that we might be faced with, and of course, the opportunities that are coming out of the crisis that we're faced with as a country. We have been, as ACTOM, involved in the renewable projects as started a couple of years ago, from the DMRE's point of view, where has been the anchor of the program for a while, from bid window 1 up to 5. And then of course, then due to the constraints and the challenges, then the industry evolved when we started getting involved in private PPAs as well. I think in the process, there's been a lot of challenges that have been noted, which I think we can elaborate on further. I think some of the challenges, Carlos touched on them a little bit. There's still some issues around policy, from whether you look at it and say it's government policy, when you're talking about triple PFA, when you start looking at the triple B codes, and the consistency thereof, where you would look at the DMRE program. We all know that it follows all the government policy from triple PFA, triple B policies. However, then the private PPAs, where are we in terms of aligning policy between the DMRE program or the government program and aligning that with the private sector as well, and saying, is there consistency in the policies that will then generate demand enough for local manufacturers? Because if there's inconsistency, what you might then see is in the private sector, the opportunities for local manufacturers might not then be available. So we can elaborate on that a bit further as we carry on with the webinar. Also, then the issues of skills, it's still a major challenge. Looking at the demand that is upcoming, when you look at the NECOM in the presidency, they're talking about 50 to 60 gigawatts of renewable energy that has to be put in the stream in the next 10 years up to 2030. That's quite a massive program. However, is the country got enough skills, not just construction skills, where at the moment we're noting more that the focus is on the construction side. What about the manufacturing value chain? If I look at our organization, for an example, you find that we've got enough skills in what we do. However, downstream in terms of our suppliers, there's now we're starting to have challenges in terms of capacity, and of course diversifying the supply chain. There's already challenges in that space. Now, are we investing enough in skills in the manufacturing side, not just the focus which I see at the moment being more on the construction side? And in South Africa for a long while, we were very self-reliant in manufacturing in the olden days, where the artisanship in terms of skills development was the order of the day. How can we get the country back there where we put more skills from welders, electricians, millwrights, boiler makers, those kind of skills that then feeds into the manufacturing value chain? Are we spending a lot of effort in there? It's a discussion that we will need to have. The other part to this, of course, then becomes government support in terms of incentives to local manufacturers. Again, talking to tier 2 and downstream suppliers and service providers. What you then find is the demand then is there now, it's becoming a bit more visible. We need to then sort out this value chain. However, funding constraints become an issue, capacity constraints financially becomes an issue. Are there incentives? Are they clear enough to the industry? Are they communicated well to the industry? What is the support system that makes sure that you can apply for these incentives or these grants and speedily get to have that capacity? And those are some of the challenges that we need to look into very quickly as this demand is growing. And the other side to the equation then is technology itself. When you look at our country or the continent of Africa, you find that then we probably a couple of years behind in terms of technology. When I listen to my colleague now, Kailo, talking about, for example, battery assembly or battery manufacturing, he's already referred to just one supplier or service provider. Where is that capacity from the technology point of view? I mean, if I look at some of the world's best battery manufacturers, I've visited one in recent times, and the whole factory, in terms of the efficiency and quality, it's run by robots. Of course, for the social side of our country, we need more still to create employment. So we're not at the space where we can run factories using robots. However, to keep up and be competitive with the global manufacturers, we need to then incorporate and have a balance between technology and, of course, creating employment. So these are some of the issues that we need to very quickly address. Align as an industry, including support from government and private industry. It cannot just be government that has to provide all the solutions, but as private industry, we need to play our part to ensure that skills are available, technology is on par with the rest of the world. funding challenges are resolved as speedily as possible, and of course the demand, which is then the anchor of everything else that flows through for manufacturers. I think, Chris, I'll stop at that at the moment. We can then take this discussion further and elaborate on the issues that I've raised. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Caspar. And yeah, so we've now had 3 presenters, all sticking to their time slots well. I would again encourage the audience to please pose your questions on the Q&A. I'm sure there are many issues on your mind that have arisen as the discussions have proceeded. But we're now going to move on to our final panelist, and that is Wilma Muller. Wilma is the sales manager for ACTOM Power Transformers. She has 23 years of experience in the transformer industry, specializing in transformer design. And with the privilege of a bursary from City Power, she could see the whole distribution network, including protection and control elements. She then ventured into a business position with a technical basis, specializing in insulation materials for transformers. And she's currently the sales manager with ACTOM Power Transformers. She uses her experience to interpret the customer's requirements from a tender and then produce the tender itself, and when successful, run the project from receipt of order until the tender requirements are complete. So Wilma, I'm interested to hear what ACTOM Power Transformers is up to, what size transformers they make. Are they focusing on distribution transformers, or are you venturing into the transmission transformers, you know, at voltages above 132 kV? Be very interesting to hear what you're up to. So Wilma, over to you now.
You muted?
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present and to talk to the audience and basically present to you guys what we are up to at Power Transformers. So in terms of the power transformer space and the renewables, we are able to produce transformers class 1, class 2, the PTSs. So really from the small transformers right to the big transformers that connect the IPP to the grid. And then what we've done is for the class 3 transformers and above, we have a long-standing relationship with GE, as our roots are basically from that relationship we had in the past. And with that, we opened up that channel to basically bring in the class 3 transformers from GE Turkey. That factory has been approved and accredited by ACTOM, and we currently, as it stands, we have one design that is already approved by ACTOM for this application. In terms of the class 1, class 2 transformers, we are truly the only, shall I say, local manufacturer, as we do the design, development, and all of the manufacturing we are doing locally. We don't have a big brother sitting overseas that we rely on to do R&D and then use that in our designs. We basically have developed all our designs from our history that we have. So in terms of that, we are really supportive to the local industry, and we have basically the biggest installed base transformers for the renewable sector in terms of the transformers linking to the IPP. And going forward with the hopefully with the policies in place, also with our reputation that we have for the supplying of these transformers, is to keep on supporting this industry and supplying the required transformers. New development that we've done and the product that we've developed for the renewable sector and also other industries is the after-sales service of online condition monitoring. We have found that a lot of our customers are now owners of a piece of equipment, that they may only have one on their farm, or maybe they have 1 or 2 farms where they have one of these big transformers on each one. The thing is, with a power transformer, you need to treat it as it was designed to be treated, and you need to look at the condition of the transformer. So what we've done is, with the transformers, we encourage customers to put the capital equipment onto the transformer so that we can get the necessary information from the transformer to do the analysis and to view the condition of the transformer in real time. So in this, what we do is we look at the power analysis of the transformer. We could have a DGA on the unit, where we're also looking at the moisture and KV. We're looking at the climatic conditions, where we have an overlay of the area conditions, and this gives us real-time information on the transformer. We can look at the transformer's loading trends, we can look at the harmonics that the transformer is seeing, and make sure that the transformer is operated within its design parameters. These events are all uploaded to the cloud, time-stamped, and if we detect something on there, it basically goes back to the power analyzer, grabs those signals so that we can analyze it later. This is a great advantage for the operating staff on the plant to basically have an engineer on standby that's an expert on a transformer to basically interpret what these information is all about and what the condition of the transformer is. Just a few references. I'm just focusing on window 1 to 4. We have produced all of these transformers in line with that. These are the larger transformers that is connected to the high voltage side at 132 or 66 or 88, depending on the network that is the closest to that renewable farm. And then we've also produced the smaller transformers that are collecting from the wind turbine or from the inverter. The latest concept that we are doing is basically where we're doing the LV panel with a transformer and a ring main unit on a common base with a oil tray, where we basically the civil works on site is reduced, where this unit are just put down as a completed unit ready for service. So in terms of that, I think that opens up for transformers the discussions going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Wilma. And yeah, so we've had 4 great introductory presentations from Danielle, Gaylor, Wilma, and Casper, and all giving different perspectives. And great to have ACTOM facilitating, or shall we say, leading this and sponsoring this panel discussion as the largest manufacturer of electrical equipment in South Africa. But also to have the policy, visions and insights that Gaylor can bring, and also the shall we say, the social issues of that local content can bring through Danielle's participation. So it's now going to be what I call an open panel discussion, where I'm going to sort of interact with the panelists and ask them various questions that I have on my mind. And I also welcome any discussions between the panelists themselves. If one of the panelists would like to respond to some of the answers that have been given by another panelist and have a sort of discussion around that, that would be a pleasure to facilitate. So please feel free, panelists, to interact. And in the meantime, I'm going to encourage again questions from the audience, because after this open panel discussion with the panelists, we're going to take questions from the audience itself. And I do see that there is a first question on the screen, which I'll get to during the Q&A session. So I'd like to sort of kick off with Daniela, and I suppose this also extends also to Gaydor, but let's focus on you, Daniela. You talked about the large utility scale public procurements via the REAP program. You talked about large private power purchase agreements, procurements with large industries, and Gaylor did as well. And it is, the figures are impressive. But I wonder, it's a bugbear of mine that we focus on these big projects and we don't say enough about the thousands and thousands of small projects that are taking place under the radar as we speak. And I see, and this is where I want your input, please. I see the opportunities for localization as significantly greater in these smaller projects and the smaller systems than I do for the large systems. And it's not to say that the small systems are small, in the sense that in aggregation, they are massive, truly massive. And the opportunities for localization and jobs and skills development and entrepreneurial activity are, I believe, are very significant. And it's a bugbear of mine that the planners and the government people and the DMRE and the DTIC seem to completely neglect this environment. And I'm talking here about domestic, commercial, manufacturing, and agricultural sector. Not the mining sector, those are the big projects, not the energy intensive sector, those are the big projects, but the many projects that are probably less than 1 megawatt in size. Maybe some of them extend a little bit above that. But that is where I see the biggest opportunities. And I'd like your comments, firstly, Daniela, and then we'll go on to Gaylor, because I think he is also very active in that sector as well. So, Daniela, your thoughts as to why we tend to neglect these smaller projects in the work that we do and the things we talk about.
Certainly. I think that's a very prompting question, that. And my gut instinct is to refer to economies of scale. You know, when you're talking about really stimulating economic change, when you're talking about really stimulating mass skills development and manufacturing supply chains, it's easier done, I suppose, with these very large projects, which would then be very regulated as well. You know, in some of the smaller spaces, in the medium and small megawatt generation spaces, if we're talking about households and rooftops, if we're then talking about hospitals and some slightly larger consumers than residential, you don't see that they're regulated in terms of implementing BE strategies. You can't possibly expect a small rooftop solar installer to, you know, fork out a percentage of profit, I suppose, on supply development and skills development initiatives. So as important as it is, you know, once all of, if you look cumulatively at the generation capacities and the manufacturing capacities of these small scale generators, then certainly it becomes a conversation. But if you break it down into the actual company, you know, the business on the ground, trying to start up, trying to employ people, trying to develop skills and you know, set themselves up as worthy competitors in the industry, I think the focus remains very much on the bottom line. And so, you know, to over-regulate small companies like that and expect them to procure locally manufactured goods when imported goods are far more cost effective, you know, there's very much a balancing act there in terms of to what extent do you develop the business, and to what extent can you expect that small business to develop the economy. I think there's a bit of a conversation there in terms of balancing expectations. You know, that there's there's a lot to be said for expecting the private sector to drive what I'm calling economic change, in terms of upskilling and empowering suppliers and increasing manufacturing capacities. The private sector is, and I think always will be, very, very flexible in terms of implementing strategies and being that driver of change. But certainly there's a lot that has to come from government as well. Talking about policy alignment, how easy is it for small companies like that to access funding, for example? How easy is it for them to take on the interns and develop the skills that are so very necessary? So I think as soon as, as Caspar was alluding to earlier, if government can also, play a huge role, a necessary role, in making funding more available, in relaxing sort of red tape, so to speak, then certainly I think that those small generators, the rooftop installers and the medium-sized installers, can definitely be brought into the conversation in terms of manufacturing potential.
Thank you. Gaylor, would you like to weigh in here on the subject? And yeah, I hear what you're saying, Danielle, but I still tend to, well, it gets to some of the policy issues, which I think Gaylor is very, is a good person to speak to. I mean, what should we be trying to achieve with localization, and how should we achieve it? So, for example, should we be focusing on what I call localization by decree? In other words, a tender comes out project by project with a statement in there that says, thou shalt have 16% local content on PV panels. Thou shalt have X percentage local content overall. Or should government intervention be focused on creating the right environment for organic localization and growth, not project by project, but by putting out the right economic signals that encourage localization, as rather than this prescriptive process of by decree. I personally have a problem with this prescriptive process, because there are times when rules need to be broken, and if there's a prescriptive process, it makes it difficult. So I'm suggesting that there should be more signals, economic signals used, as opposed to a prescriptive localization requirement in a tender document project by project. But listen, what I think is not important, you the experts, and we want to hear what you have to say, Gaylor. I just wanted to stimulate those ideas to get you talking.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'll start with that, and I'll touch as well on your first question that you addressed to Daniel. Yeah, look, I think to date it's been a mixed approach, having broad local content requirements, as well as what we call in the policy landscape designation, which is having determined products that should be localized. Going forward, certainly as part of the SAIEE process, we are focusing on having broad localization ambition, but we're not prescriptive when it comes to particular components. We have to realize that it has not worked as we wanted it to work. And being prescriptive can work, but it does require one to be very on the ball with what's happening on the market, both on demand and supply, and to be very reactive in terms of how those requirements are updated on a yearly basis, if not more often than that. And we have to acknowledge that the results to date have been mixed at best. There's been some good stories, but there's been a lot of also problematic stories. And so from our perspective, from a SAIEE perspective, we're saying, no, let's get everyone to embrace and buy into a trajectory that looks at ramping up our localization objectives or our ambition from, argument's sake, for solar and wind, let's say 40–45%. That's where we are today, to something higher that rises year after year, but it's not prescribed in so much that it is actually people buy into this, and I think that's what we need. We need industry to buy into a vision where, okay, as a country, year after year, we're going to grow. But what will be localized, the specific components, that shall be laid to the market. The market will determine what makes sense to be localized. And we need to provide the ecosystem for that. Of course, it's not just about saying, oh, we're going to ramp up. If we don't do anything else, it's probably not going to work. What's the ecosystem that we put in place? What are the policies that we put in place? You spoke about small projects, I guess medium-sized projects. I mean, for me, when I think of small, I think of like more residential kind of projects. But I mean, and here, bringing those commercial, industrial, farming operations to the party is really critical. There's been a few funding pockets that have been announced, but one of the things we're working on very strongly through SAIEE is to say these funding pockets must tie in to some extent with localization objectives. And we don't just want to support imports. It would just be nonsensical to just dish out money from government for people to put systems and they're just going to import everything. But we have to do it in a clever way, because of course, if we just say it must all be localized, then no one's going to tap into those incentives, because it's just not going to work. There's just not going to be enough supply. So one way to think about it, maybe, and we're still thinking about it, but I like the way the Americans done it. We don't have the same firepower. It's not about that, okay? But it's about saying, if you don't localize, you get a basic support. You get a basic deal. Government will support you, but it will be simple. It won't be, you'll get a very normal deal. If you buy local, to a certain degree, not 100%, but to a certain degree, according to a certain trajectory, then you get a better deal. And I think what the Americans have done it in a very clever way. If you just want to tap into the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act incentive, basic is 6%. 6% tax credit, that's what you get. If you meet certain criteria, it can go up to 70%. Okay, it's really high. And the criteria are labor market requirements, localization, certain geographies. We don't have to have all of that, but we can think about it fairly creatively. And I think we just need to provide that ecosystem overall. I think it's quite important. But we need to leave the flexibility. I think for me, the area of being very prescriptive, it just doesn't work. No one wants to repeat what happened with bid window 5, where the whole bid window for the solar side was hamstrung by the implementation of local content requirements that were not in sync with the market reality. There's no point saying we want 100% local panels if at this particular time there's 0 local panel being produced in South Africa. But we could say today we think we want 40% local content. Tomorrow we think we want 45. The year after 50. The year after that 55. The year after 60. How you do that? It's your problem. You localize what you think makes sense to localize, and we'll provide the ecosystem, the incentives, the policy framework, the testing facilities, the certification facilities to enable you to do that. But I don't think we should prescribe specific components at this point. So maybe, yeah, let me leave it at that on this question. I think on the small scale projects, just briefly, I think on the residential side, there are lots of jobs to be created. I think localization is harder there because customers are not particularly interested in that. Like households, whether they localize or not, most people not particularly interested in that question. And when you deal with installers, I'm one who had the actual discussion with installers and say, okay, I want to buy local product, and you met with kind of resistance and say, well, this is the products I have. That's it. If you don't like it, just go to someone else. I'm not, so it's not easy, I think, on the residential side to incentivize it. I think it can only happen if there's just local supply, it's competitive, the guys will buy it. But I don't think it's the easiest. I think on the small markets, it can be incentivized. On the medium-sized market, it can be incentivized through what I was talking about in terms of being clever in terms of if we're providing funding from a government side, then that has to have some sort of carrot, in terms of, well, if you localize, you get more grant, or you get a lower interest rate, or you get a better tax credit, whatever the case may be. But that could also help drive some of that market, which has to be quite different from the large scale side. So certainly from a SAIEE perspective, we're looking at it. We certainly think it's important. It can't be just the utility scale, but it does require a different approach.
Gaydar, thanks for those comments. And I think I'm kind of aligned with your thinking that we shouldn't be too specific, like product specific, about local content requirements, but more about creating the right environment. I hope that's the message that I took from you, and that's certainly my view. But I'd like to move on to Casper now and ask you, I mean, Casper, ACTOM High Voltage is already a manufacturer of equipment for the grid, and you also have technology agreements with local assembly, and I guess you also import equipment fully. So it's a combination of local manufacture, local assembly, and fully imported equipment, and then putting together projects and integrating them into the system. What I want to ask you is, from the point of view of a manufacturer, a large manufacturer, ACTOM, electrical equipment manufacturer, what is it that would make a private company really invest in localization? What would you see as the things that would motivate you? For example, would higher import tariffs on imported equipment change your thinking on perhaps local manufacture or local assembly of a product? Would more attention to crime in South Africa make the difference? I mean, your partners, your overseas partners who might want to invest in South Africa, what would make them choose South Africa as a destination as opposed to the many other destinations out there? What do we have to do as a country to attract technology partners, partnering with people like ACTOM, and bringing their products and setting up some kind of facility? What is it you'd like to see, and what is it you would not like to see? Like we've seen manufacturers come into South Africa, set up, only to find the policy environment changing and demand changing as a result of certain people in Eskom don't want to buy wind farms anymore, and suddenly these projects collapse. So what is it that you would like to see that would encourage this, and what is it you would not like to see that would definitely discourage things? Thanks.
All right. No, thank you, Chris. I think maybe let's start on the things that we would like to see. I think policy certainty is one of them. I think the challenges that we've had over the last couple of years has been this uncertain policy, or the fluid policy decisions, where in one political term there's a policy, there's direction, and a change in political leadership, the decision changes in terms of localization, industrialization policy for the country, And I think those are the challenges that our partners look at and say the uncertainty in policies and environment makes it difficult for them to invest. Secondly, I think Gailo mentioned it earlier, the demand, it's been very inconsistent, very fluctuating, very fluid, that in 1 or 2 years there's a stable demand. Another 2 years, everything goes bust, nothing happens. The suppliers into the value chain close shop. Then you have to create another stream of suppliers that are not in line with what you are trying to get to. And I think those have been serious challenges that we've had as manufacturers, where policy and consistency in the demand has been not there. However, of course, protectionism is not what we're asking for. And I think you've mentioned the point where you're saying, is the policy too prescriptive, or is there an environment that enables long-term looking into whatever that manufacturing will do? Then, of course, now you start having to look and say, in the continent itself, if you look at a lot of our neighboring countries, there's a lot of strategy in terms of transition, energy transition, where the renewable program that we're talking about, I think we tend to focus more in South Africa. However, there's a lot happening in our neighboring countries, in the Southern African region, for an example, even outside in the Eastern Bloc, the Western Bloc, there's projects happening. And if we as South Africans, we're serious about industrializing the economy, then the policies must not just be looking at what we are doing in South Africa. If you say the Southern African community needs to look at policies that says their projects, for example, in terms of local content, must be Southern African community based, not just South Africa based. Then you start talking also the ECOWAS region and saying maybe there's discussion from the regional point of view in terms of localization policies. And now you start talking demand that generates economies of scale, that brings then competitiveness into the products that we do, be it batteries, be it inverters, be it grid equipment that we manufacture, be it transformers. If we start looking at this as a continent and saying how much demand is there, not just in South Africa, because the South African demand goes up and down at every point in time, but the demand then from the regional perspective, that then creates enough demand, enough for us to be competitive. Because now when we start talking tariffs, now we're talking protectionism. That creates problems elsewhere in the ecosystem, where some of the partners and then will do the same and say, all right, for an example, I mean, we all know that the panels, China is the biggest supplier or the manufacturer. If then we start putting higher tariffs, what happens then from the globalization point of view? We will be happy when China puts tariffs on some of the items that we export to China. That's not where we want to go. But it's just about generating enough demand from the continent itself. There are policies in place that, I mean, as a continent, we're looking at when you start talking Africa Free Trade Area. I think in a long term, that's the kind of policies we need to be talking about. However, if we then stay in South Africa, I think the political issues are a problem and are a challenge. What we don't like to see, of course, is again, I think more and more it's demand, Chris, and I think Gailo touched on this very, very importantly and in detail. And of course, then that generates employment, that creates a larger value chain, and then more possibilities then for manufacturing and also being competitive. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I took out that, I think we're probably all on the same page on this. We need policy certainty. We need policy. We don't want policy contradictions. We need demand consistency so that there's a clear picture over a number of years. You've talked about the need for free trade areas to open up business opportunities, for example, in the regional and a regional approach, to increase demand. And the point that you made is that you don't like protectionism. I presume there's many other environmental issues. When I say environment, I'm talking about the business environment. That we should sort out. Things like corruption, things like lawlessness, things like crime. These are all inhibitors, and I think there are negative perceptions out there about South Africa as a destination in this regard that we have to deal with. So yeah, there's a lot I think that we have to do at that level to make manufacturers like ACTOM and others reach out to technology partners around the world and to encourage these partners to invest in South Africa with local partners. I want to move on to Wilma now, and by the way, colleagues on the panel, please feel free to chip in as others are talking. If you want to make a point, on what somebody else is speaking about, don't be shy. This is not very structured. We can make this a real conversation. So please chip in as you need. But I want to talk about the question of standards and testing, because I believe that standardization increases the opportunity for demand, as it were, because it helps manufacturers because they're all working to a common standard. Of course, it promotes competition as well, which I think is a good thing. And then, of course, alongside standards comes the ability to test in accordance with standards and to certify products. So the whole question of standards works together with capability for certification in South Africa. And I think this has been touched on by Gaylor and also by Casbah. So I'm interested to hear your views on how standards and certification can help local manufacture and localization. And where do you think we are in South Africa on this? Are we falling behind? Over to you, Wilma.
Thank you very much. For power transformers, the standard that we use is IEC 60076, and it's got many parts. It's basically a guidance document that gives out for certain voltages what the BIL should be. But in terms of the application for a specific plant, it is open to interpretation. What we are trying to do in the renewable space, because we have such a large base of installed base, we get, for instance, impedance is an important characteristic of a transformer, and basically determines the fault level at which the whole network where that transformer is implemented. So what a lot of the IPPs ask, they have the bespoke specification that is based, it's got more detail that's based on the IEC specification. And then what they do is they call up the ACTOM specification, which allows us quite a lot of support in terms of that which we have designed before. We are unique in the world because our topography is that we are on a really high altitude, and we know how to take care of the design to do that. A lot of these applications for the renewables are set in areas where the environmental temperature is quite high. So in basing it on IEC 76 and then on the ACTOM specifications really helps us a lot to use our knowledge and to basically guide that. The problem that we have is that a lot of the probably bidders from overseas do not understand that specification. They understand the IEC one, but not the higher level that ACTOM puts onto those ones. And from the developers, they may be experts on the whole of the network, but not necessarily expertise on the transformer itself and the application of the ACTOM specification on the requirements for IEC 76. So in terms of that, we try to guide for inquiries, try to guide the vendors or the buyers to standardize on transformers, which will help in future to basically, if something goes wrong, there is a strategic spare that can move between some of these plants in order to maintain the constant supply. Because the transformer and also the other equipment like a CASBAS is basically connecting the transformer or the supply chain to the grid. So if you don't have that pipeline open, it is a critical part. It's broken, so you can produce electricity, but you cannot send it anyway. So in terms of that, it's very important for us to guide the customers in terms of think about what you are buying. The environment is different from somewhere around the world because it's a high temperature environment. It is a high altitude environment, and basing it on ACTOM specification will give you the best outcome for the transformer.
Just to move to Casbah, to the other part of the question, and that was testing and certification. To what extent is testing and certification of locally manufactured or assembled, high voltage equipment and transformers, for that matter, is it an inhibiting factor in South Africa, or is it an enabling? Do we have to do more to make it enabling, or is it just fine as things stand? So, question: is this an enabling or an inhibiting factor as things stands in South Africa at the moment?
Sorry, I'm just thinking load shedding area here. Chris, it's actually inhibiting at the moment. The capacity for testing is not there 100%. There is some capacity. However, I mean, if we look at the equipment that we produce, for an example, between all the local manufacturers, we're not talking ACTOM here, that capacity isn't there. I think with the DMRE, the DTIC, there have been discussions around the local testing facilities, which is the Bureau of Standards, where there's been a discussion for them to invest in those facilities, to put them to the state where we can compare internationally, and that has not happened, and for whatever reasons, it hasn't happened. And it is a challenge because now what happens is you have to have a sample sent to some other factory or other test lab in Holland or in China to then test the equipment. It's quite a serious cost with no support. Where you look at other countries, the governments then will provide incentives as well for that when there's lack of capacity. So it is an inhibiting issue at the moment for South Africa. And if not addressed speedily, it then creates another stumbling block for the localization or the opportunities that are available, because we all are keen maybe to invest based on the demand. However, the capacity then to test becomes another bottleneck.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on this subject?
Yeah, just on power transformers, we have to have our own laboratory or test facility to test the transformers. And in actual fact, ACTOM power transformers, we in the privileged position of having 2 such facilities. What we are doing in the meantime, in order for it to be, with a lack of, shall we say, a third-party accredited laboratory, we are now in the process of accrediting our own test facilities to be a laboratory certified facility, to basically compare our test results with other factories and with other test laboratories around the world, and to make sure that we are on those standards here.
That's really interesting, Wilma. I just wanted to ask you while we're on the subject, if you are establishing your own accredited lab to do testing and certification, do you offer this service to other players in your sector? I mean, even competitors, for example, would they use the ACTOM facility? If the SABS maybe not provide a suitable facility, would they use a competitor's facility to do their testing, or how does it work?
We haven't really had the SABS. In previous years, we did have the SABS come to accredit, say for instance, impulse testing, but that with lack of resources, I think that's gone to the wayside. But we have in recent years with some of our competitors having test facilities not being able to work, we have opened or marketed our facility for that purposes. And then we are testing for some individuals on those, but it's on a request basis and depending if we do have the capacity, but that we can make available. We are operating on the beta stage for our accreditation for the laboratory, so not yet certified, in the process of getting certified.
Thanks. Sorry, Danielle, I want to come to you on this, and I guess this is a fairly broad question, but when it comes to local content requirements, I suppose one's trying to serve the South African economy, and I think we all, have it in our hearts. We should increase local manufacture because it creates jobs, it adds value to the economy, and it keeps money in South Africa. So it's a noble objective. I'm sure of that. But I think my question is, to what degree should this be balanced against the needs for the broader economy? In other words, if one focuses, let's say, on the electrical sector and driving employment in the electrical sector, it may impede, or shall I say, the lack of progress in that may impede the whole country. So, for example, I just recall local requirements for manufacture of solar PV panels in South Africa. There was a drive for local manufacture of solar PV panels. In the end, it's not a very labor-intensive process, and it's a relatively small part of the project, the assembly of the solar PV panels, because all the materials are imported. And yet, those requirements were kind of holding up some of the bid window 5 and the risk mitigation IPP programs. The localization requirements were holding up financial close and really impacting the whole economy because of load shedding. So what I'm saying is this balance between the interests of a particular sector, the electrical sector, versus the interests of the whole country, where the jobs might be much higher if one could open the doors, to an imported product that cannot be made effectively in South Africa. It can open up the economy, by creating more electricity supply, for example. I hope I'm explaining myself, but what I'm trying to get at is sometimes the requirements of a specific sector might not be in the interest of the whole country's economy, and where that balance should be. But do you think we've got the balance right? For example, recently, in the most recent bid processes, they have dropped the localization requirement, as I understand it, in order to speed up the delivery of these projects to help the whole economy. Is that going too far? Or should we go back to what we had? Or where does this balance lie? What are your thoughts?
I think, again, a very, very good question, and probably something that's top of mind for a lot of people. As you say, I think it's a very honorable intention to try to force localization, so to speak. This issue of the panels is quite a contentious one. and maybe just to explain a little bit why it is such a very difficult issue to overcome. So again, stemming from the Triple PFA and all the National Treasury circulars, the National Treasury circulars on the solar panels, those are probably about 7 years old. In those circulars, they stipulate that you can manufacture, to an extent, not fully, the panels, but you can have local content contributions from a panel through the frames, through laminations. You're not going to assemble a frame separately from a panel. You're not going to laminate a panel separately from where it has been manufactured. You know, it's impossible to split those processes up. So yes, of course, we've got a very strong steel sector in South Africa, but the frames are just, you know, local manufactured frames are just not featuring in the panels. And so, you know, I think the requirements, the very technical requirements on where the local content potential lies is probably quite outdated, you know, and well, not outdated, but just impractical, really. And so, you know, the burden sort of sits then on government again, as the policy makers, as the regulators, to see, well, what is organic? I think Gaylor and Casper both mentioned, what is organic within our economy? What can feasibly be done in South Africa, you know? And so we're not hitting those local content targets on the panels. We're still seeing there's the first thing that everybody applies for an exemption for. And yet these policies sort of stay in place. And, you know, what makes it quite a difficult thing is that this is such a, the IPP, the REIPP space specifically, is a highly competitive space. It's a reverse auction where you're bidding basically for the lowest tariff, balanced against the highest economic development targets. And that in itself is quite a balancing act that takes quite a bit of finesse. But there's huge reward for that. It's a 20-year PPA. And so anybody from the outside looking in would say, but why are these IPPs not just setting up their own manufacturing plants? If it's such an easy thing to do, you know, coming from a space of the investment and knowing full well what all the technical requirements will be, having line of sight of the demand, you know, is it not worth the risk to just take that leap of faith, put the investments in place and set up your own local manufacturing plant? You know, what would be the holdup there? And I think, again, your question to Wilma now is, are you going to make that, are you going to make those products available to your competitors? Coming back again to the fact that this is such a highly competitive space, are you going to open that up to the rest of the market? That's where you're going to see mass job creation and you know, that's where you're going to see stimulation of that whole supply chain. And yet you know, the IPPs are very much stuck in this catch-22. Do I benefit myself and others in light of all this policy uncertainty? And so they sort of stuck on the brink of taking that leap of faith. You know, we've got industry associations like SAPFIA who are trying their utmost to do that groundwork research and try to give that certainty, to give a bit of guidance into what is it going to take to actually stimulate that somebody just sets up a manufacturing plant. Then you take a step back as well and you look beyond the IPP's immediate needs, you know, not just from a technical perspective, but then you start asking questions about, but what is bankable? Who are the investors? Who are all the commercial banks that have got a stake in these projects, who are expecting their returns? What are they seeing as low risk? What are they seeing as bankable manufactured products? They all want tier 1 panels. You know, does it mean that a tier 1 panel is any less efficient or any less risk averse than a tier 2 panel, for example? Well, the lenders certainly seem to think so. You know, and so you talking about standardization, your question about standardization, we need tier 1 panels manufactured in South Africa. Well, do we really? What's organic for the country, you know? And bringing it back again to the broader economic benefits, I think the renewable energy space has just found itself at this incredible moment in history when I think load shedding is at its absolute worst. Industry, residential consumers, everybody is quite fed up. And the timing of it all means that we're now looking to renewables to provide this grand solution to all of our load shedding dilemmas, which is seriously hindering any other economic growth. And so we're all looking to renewables and saying, well, are you the solution or are you not? Are you going to create jobs? Are you going to switch the lights on? And so we're stuck at, again, this catch-22 where we're trying to stimulate local manufacturing. And I think it's a very important step to take. You know, slow and steady sort of wins the race. Are we just going to start importing Chinese panels for the sake of keeping the lights on? You know, we're probably getting to quite an urgent space where a question like that needs to be taken quite seriously. But as soon as you know, sort of relax the rules in a sense, our local manufacturers, you know, we're going to take the pressure off the conversations of encouraging people to just take the leap of faith and invest where they need to, and that's in investing in key components. I think if you start seeing that investment in key components and people take very seriously this opportunity, challenge, yes, but this opportunity of starting to manufacture key components in South Africa, you're going to see a whole supply chain that's suddenly stimulated. You know, talking about is renewable energy the solution to the job creation crisis versus coal? Is the just energy transition really going to be just if you know, if renewable energy plants are built in 18 months or less, and thereafter operated by about 20 people and a whole bunch of IT. But I think if we see that those key components manufactured in South Africa, we're not just talking then about solar. We start talking about green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is a very interesting conversation because now you're talking about regional development generation of power. And I think Casper's point about regional local content is a fantastic one as well. Green hydrogen, you suddenly start talking about the export potential of renewable energy, and that's huge. So no, I don't think that solar power, for example, is the solution to the electricity crisis in itself. I don't think it's the solution to the job creation crisis in itself. But looking at the whole supply chain and the regional potential that it stimulates, I think it's important to keep the pressure on trying to stimulate that local manufacturing for sure.
Thanks very much for that, Danielle. And I think you've opened up the question, and I'd like to take it a little bit further with Gaylor. Now, Gaylor, I know that you are, you know, leading the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, which is looking at localization and economic development that the renewable sector offers. But I want to ask you for your view, because there's a lot of new narratives coming out now, especially as the IRP, you know, is perhaps getting closer to being published, the updated IRP. And there are people that are pushing the coal agenda. There are people that are pushing the nuclear agenda. There are people pushing the gas and diesel-fired power agenda. And of course, there are people pushing the renewable energy agenda. But I want to ask you, you know, as a person who's involved in, you know, in trade and industry and research and all that goes with it, based on your knowledge and experience, what offers greater localization and job creation opportunities? You know, the coal lobby would say coal-fired power stations because of the mining that goes with it, etc. The nuclear people will say nuclear power, you know, this is long-term, this is, you know, high localization, a lot of construction, etc. Gas and diesel, people pushing that. And renewable energy, where do you think the real jobs lie? And I'm not just talking about construction jobs, but you know, all that goes along with these projects, or let's say renewable energy, whether it's manufacture of components, whether it's installations, whether it is ongoing operations and maintenance, and just rebuilding more and more plants. Which of these sectors should we offer the greatest localization job creation? Is it coal? Is it nuclear? Is it gas and diesel? Or is it renewable energy? Your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I think I'll start by touching a little bit on the question you asked, Daniel, as a way to answer to answering this particular question. It's not often that you see an industry experiencing exponential growth. Okay, it's not even once per generation, honestly. I mean, this is like once a century opportunity to see any industry across sector, doesn't matter, that sees significant exponential growth. And this is the opportunity here, that renewable energy brings when it comes to manufacturing. Yes, it is of a very low base, of course, but the growth prospects and the growth trajectory is mind-boggling. And so if, as a country, we look back in 5 or 10, 15 years, and we look back at the whatever the number is, 20, 30, 40, 50 gigawatts of renewable energy that we built in the country. And of course, by then, load shedding will be a far, nightmare of the past. And we don't have an industry to show for it. Then I think it's a massive, massive missed opportunity. So, certainly all the narrative about relaxing and the ambition and saying we must just procure no matter what it costs, we must import no matter what it costs, is extremely short-sighted, in my opinion, and actually really undermining the prospect of a great industrial opportunity going forward. So when we look at what brings the most prospect, it's important to keep that in mind, that exponential, growth opportunity that's coming. When we think about our energy mix, let me be clear as well, the first thing that matters is not how many jobs are going to be created. Okay, the first thing that matters is what does the system need, all right? What is the least cost pathway? What brings energy reliability? And increasingly, what is, of course, low carbon. And I think all studies worth their salt show that renewable energy is the technology of choice when it comes to having a system that is least cost, reliable, low carbon going forward, with some peaking capacity that could be a bit of gas, could be some battery, but that effectively really shows us that's the trajectory. Then if we look at it from an employment perspective and a manufacturing opportunity going forward, it's clear as well that renewable energy as a group, it's not one single technology, renewable energy as a group, and by that I mean renewable energy and battery storage as a group, really brings the largest opportunities. And I think that is clear in terms of employment when it comes to operation and maintenance, installation, and it's clear in terms of building the value chains. And if we are really serious about building the value chains, it's not just about one small component here and there, then it's really clear, all the work that's been done, that's where the opportunity lies. So for me, we've got, often we talk about this is the perfect storm, everything negative being thrown at us. Well, in that case, it's potentially everything positive being thrown at us. Now we have to harvest. We've got our system engineers who tell us we need a lot of renewable energy. We've got all the systems engineers around the globe telling us, well, we're building a lot of renewable energy. So massive growth. And we've got the economic opportunities that are also aligned and said, okay, we've got a massive opportunity in creating employment and manufacturing opportunities in this industry. So the opportunity is there. The question is whether we seize that opportunity going forward. And here we need to be intentional about it. Because let me be very clear, if we leave it to the market, yes, we will have a lot of renewable energy into the system, but very little will be localized. I think this is, what will be localized is what we have localized to date, the balance of plant, because of course it makes no sense to import the balance of plant, but anything else will be very limited. And so we need to have that enabling environment. There is significant interest from the private sector to localize. I mean, there's even one of the key off-takers in the private sector. I won't mention the name because I'm not too sure if it's public, but one of the key off-takers is looking to vertically integrate and build their own panel manufacturing in South Africa. That's how bullish they are. They're saying, well, we're gonna roll out gigawatts and gigawatts for our own company. To meet our demand, we might as well, vertically integrate, with partners. I mean, this is the scale of the opportunity. Everyone is looking at it, And as I mentioned earlier, I think in my introduction, I mean, even some things that I didn't think would be possible, like wafers and ingots for panels. I really didn't think we could make that, competitively in South Africa. Well, we've been contacted. People are looking and say, okay, we are already at feasibility stage. We're looking at what's possible. We're looking at sites. We want to do it. We want to make it happen. So I think once we start looking at the whole value chain and not just one or two components, and often I would say we have to let go of what appears to be like the sexiest components, like everybody wants to do, and then we start looking at, okay, where are we actually competitive and what can we do, and then maybe down the line, the sexier stuff, like the lithium and battery cells, they become possible. But there's a lot of things that we can do besides that. So for me, we must unpack that. That's what we try to do through SAIEE, is to really provide that picture going forward. And just a little plug in, take the opportunity before we end, that we're going to be releasing a revised renewable energy master plan document literally in the next couple of weeks for comments, and I really encourage everyone, to take the time to go through it and give comments in terms of where the opportunity lies and where the policy framework comes in as a response, because that's really going to answer a lot of the questions that we are talking about now, or at least attempt to do that, and bring also social partners together, government, business, and labor, to buy into a vision. And let me just end on that. I find it strange sometimes in a lot of sectors, you could say they're overambitious. If you talk to people in manufacturing, in labor and government, those grand schemes, we want to, achieve those numbers, super ambitious. But we look at sometimes the renewable energy industry, I feel like we have got a little bit of the other way around. It's all about, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. Let's not do too much. Let's be ambitious, realistic, but ambitious. And I think that's what we need. We need to say, okay, how do we ramp up? And I think that's what we try to do to SAIEE. So I'm really looking forward to also engaging with all of you on that.
Yeah, and we're also looking forward to receiving this document, Gaylor, because as you say, I think it's going to encapsulate a lot of the ambitions that you have, that you see, your vision, and it will hopefully give guidance to industry and guide their ambitions and focus them on what is possible. And I really think that's an important document that comes out for public comment, and congratulations firstly, and secondly, well done on the transparency that this goes through a public comment process, allowing industry to see it, to view it, to criticize it, to comment on it, to make suggestions to it. It hopefully will result in a much stronger document with a lot of buy-in from the industry. So I think this is really important work that's coming together from SAIEE, the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, There are other master plans out there for different sectors, but we're talking about renewable energy today. So this plan that you bring forward is the very heart of these ambitions for localization in South Africa. So I'm really looking forward to that. Ladies and gentlemen, I only see one question on the from the floor, from viewers, and we've got over 100 viewers that have attended today's proceedings. I think it hit about 120, 130 at its peak. And I don't know who has posed this question. It doesn't say, but I'm going to pose it to anybody on the panel that wants to take it up. And that is this: what role do you, the panel, think that inward investment, that is foreign domestic investment, can play in localizing content? I sort of see, how is it, do we have enough money in South Africa? Do we need foreign money to come into South Africa to invest? Does this foreign money come with strings attached that may be unwelcome? Or do we need foreign domestic investment badly enough that we can offer these investors good deals, very good deals, better than our other competitive countries? Because we're not alone in this. There are other countries also vying for investment and offering incentives and encouraging people and offering the right environment to do business. How important is foreign domestic investment playing in the localization of the renewable energy sector in South Africa? Does anybody want to take a stab at that?
I want to
Come on, Caspar. Yeah.
But I don't want to hug the floor, so someone else needs to.
Come in. Others can come in later.
Okay, I'll be brief. Yeah, I think it's really important to have that mix. We do have a lot of capabilities already in country, and I think we can leverage those dramatically. But when it comes to access to the latest technology, and particularly to intellectual property, we rely on foreign investors to bring that to our shores. And I think that is quite critical, that when it comes to R&D, with a few exceptions, we are takers rather than leaders. And so we need that partnership with foreign investors to bring that to South Africa. And I think that is where we need to find the right balance, leveraging existing capabilities, which we have many, the few pockets where we're really good in terms of R&D, because we have some where we're really good. But if we're serious about saying we're going to build an entire value chain, we have to acknowledge that when it comes to certain components, it's only going to come through the existing OEMs and our foreign support. So finding the balance is important, and I think that is part of providing that environment, because of course some of our partners have come in and burned their fingers historically over the last 10 to 12 years, and are a bit more wary of investing again. But that bullish market that we've been talking about for the last 2 hours really opens up some interesting trajectory and certainly interest from partners across the board. So let's look at it in terms of how we do it together. I think that's the best way, and we'll find out that actually there's a lot that we can do here, a lot more that we can do. For me, if I were to show you a little picture that says these are all the components that go into a solar plant, a wind farm, a lithium-ion battery, a vanadium-based battery, and like in green what we make, and in yellow what we could make. Well, most of it will be green and yellow. There's very little red that we can't make. There's very little that we actually just cannot make. But to leverage that, to make it happen, it's the local capabilities, like ACTOM, of course, and the support from some of our key OEMs and partners to make that happen in the country.
So I just want to ask.
Yeah, please come in, please.
The environment. I always have a question around this. The environment says you have to be BBBEE 1, but you want foreign direct investment. How do you? I can't see that a foreign investor can mix that up, because for BBBEE 1 you need to have 51% from a local ownership, so they've got the controlling investment. How do you combine that to encourage a foreign investor to bring in the money, to bring in the technology, but not have the controlling interest? That's just something that I want to throw out there.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I'm going to try and look at some of the other questions. I'm told that there are other questions. I'm just hoping I can see them all. Oh, yes. I'm trying to read this one. I hope I can read it. Danielle mentioned cost-effective imported content. What about after-sales support and the current unemployment environment? How do we grow our local industry to create more jobs and create skills and grow our economy? Does that make sense? And I think, Wilma, that's directed at you. Oh no, is it Danielle? Danielle, sorry, it's directed at Danielle. I'm getting confused here.
Sure. I think a good question for sure. And sort of my knee-jerk response to that is, you're not going to suddenly see a boost in job creation numbers or a boost in local supply chains with a single project. The industry is not quite as reactive as that. You have to take a far more proactive approach to skills development, to the development of QECs and EMEs, that you can see a far more localized supply chain, particularly in the operating period, and that's achieved with taking guidance from the DTIC, and especially in the private sector, who wants to see suppliers with BEE levels. It's far more than a box ticking exercise. We have to be quite sincere and quite proactive about developing skills and developing suppliers that can be brought into the job creation and brought into the supply chains. And that's not going to happen in the period of a single capex period, the 18 to 24 month period. That's something that certainly takes time. When people talk about skills development, I think what we're seeing is, because we do a lot of compliance monitoring and auditing of these economic development performance indicators, and it's very easy to spend money on bursaries. That is skills development, certainly. It's very important. But what happens to those students after they've graduated? What support do they have during their studies? And it's a very difficult thing to do, but a very necessary thing to do, to dig deep and with sincerity make the effort to take on those interns and bring them into the workforce and develop those QSEs and EMEs to the point that they become viable suppliers and service providers to the industry. And yeah, that's slow and steady wins the race. That's not something that's going to be achieved in the construction or even the operating period of a single project.
Sorry,
colleagues, I'm going to go through a number of further questions. I'm sorry to interrupt there, but we got about 9 more questions to go through, and I'm going to ask the panelists to keep it real short. In other words, quick and snappy answers so that we can get through these. And of course, there may be need to follow up, but let's try and get through these things quite quickly and snappily. So the next question by Paul Lewis here. He says, to what extent will the grid capacity impact on demand, and where are the projects and where the projects are located? And I'm going to put this through to you, Casper, because you're involved in the grid. We talk here about 50 gigawatts of renewable energy and all these projects, etc., etc. but then we hear about grid constraints. Do we have grid constraints? Are they everywhere? Do we have areas of South Africa where there are no grid constraints? Is grid constraints a big thing? And of course, it impacts on you and your business. What are your thoughts?
It is a constraint at the moment, definitely. But what I'm seeing, ESCOM transmission specifically, is putting a lot of effort to address this, and they've put means and focus in line or in light of the challenge and the constraint. And I think they're putting a good effort in addressing this in a very, very short term. So it is a challenge, and it could be, if not addressed speedily. Of course, then the private side of it is now you start talking municipal grid for wheeling exercises. Again, there's an issue from that point that the municipal infrastructure is going to be a very serious constraint if not attended to in a very short time. So we are, I think, seeing a lot of effort from the utility to address the issue.
And while you're on the line there, Casper, because this one probably also addressed to you, it's certainly addressed to ACTOM, and the question is the delay in the unbundling and restructuring of Eskom having an impact on the plans, the investment plans for grid reinforcement, etc.? And I think this also extends to the restructuring of the electricity distribution industry. Is this very weak electricity distribution industry, impacting on investment and new capacity and expanding this electricity manufacturing sector? What are your thoughts there, Casper?
I think from the unbundling question, Chris, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen that there's a lot of improvement at transmission in terms of planning. Of course, execution is something else. But from the planning perspective, they've confirmed that there's been a lot of funding, international funding coming through to support the grid expansion. So I believe that those issues are being addressed, and I'm seeing light from where I'm sitting. If you're talking then the distribution side of the industry, I foresee challenges in a very short term if the structure of a distribution industry is not also dealt with. I know that some years ago there were talks of the regional electricity distributors. Is that maybe the solution? I might not be the right person to answer the question, but possibly that could be the question that we need to talk about now again and say to address the distribution industry, which will very quickly become a constraint, is an important discussion to have. But from the transmission, the unbundling issue, yes, it's taking a long time. However, from the planning point of view, I think they are addressing the constraints. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, Casper. We're seeing slow but steady progress now on the restructuring of Eskom and the transmission development plan, and I think there's an understanding of what has to be done there. I think what has to be done in the distribution sector is still a very grey area, and we've been talking about the backlog in the infrastructure and distribution level for like 20 years. And not seeing a lot of progress. In fact, the distribution sector seems to be as weak as ever, if not getting weaker. Okay, we're moving on to the next question here. Let's see. Okay, let's read this one out here from Jeremy Wood. Unfortunately, he has left. He's from RWW Engineering. They manufacture, by the way, switchgear as well as large inverters for solar PV systems, utility scale. Some manufacturers have gone to great lengths to manufacture products such as switchgear and even PV inverters. They're talking about themselves here, RWW. They've done a lot to try and meet local manufacturer targets. However, it appears that government tends to ignore these criteria when it suits them and allows for full importation of equipment without the repercussions. He says here we need consistency in order to upskill and commit to long-term manufacturer. So he's speaking very much from a manufacturer's perspective and the need for consistency. And I think that was the point that Casper made really earlier on, that we need consistency in revenue streams, we need consistencies in policies, we need consistencies in demand. I'm not sure if there's anything that anybody wants to say further about that hasn't already been said.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, as an industry that was until recently being part of the designation of transformers, is that in the tendering process you have to comply to putting information in to say that you comply to the local designation requirements, or that you're supplying locally, but there is the policing after that on the tender award. And if something was awarded to that's supposed to be local, that is now being purchased foreign, there's no consequences, and we don't see the consequences coming to the people. So therefore, the companies that they then import these as a whole, not supporting the local industry, it goes unnoticed.
Thanks for that. I've got a question here from the CEO of ACTOM. Unfortunately, he's also left, and this, I think, is going to be our last question. I know there are other questions that are unanswered. I'm sorry about that. But it's been a very lively discussion nevertheless. But as a last question from the CEO of ACTOM, Mervyn Naidoo. Mervyn says, the aftermarket support through the full life cycle of plant is absolutely critical. We must ensure that we do not end up with a repeat of what happened with the Transnet locomotive program. Yeah, that was a program, I think, where they ran into technical issues and corruption issues, and finally spares issues, and they couldn't get spares, and it means that this whole project becomes a colossal waste of money and time and effort, and does massive damage to the economy. So I think a very important point made by Mervyn about it's not just about the point of manufacture. It's about being able to support those products, you know, for a lifetime, which could be 20, 30, 40 years, and the importance of that. Does anybody want to make a comment on that before we close?
Yeah, so again, on that, we have seen the opportunity on that, and also the necessity of that. As we said, for transformers, we've identified that early. We developed a product that can assist customers in looking after this. We are rolling this out to our other products as well, but that will be marketed by all of those. And with the GE product that we are bringing in from that side, as a local entity, we undertake to do the installation and then to support the product technically for the life of the unit. We also have other companies within our group that can also undertake the maintenance, the after-sales service of the balance of plant, again, in the electrical sector. And if the opportunities are in the other parts, we are willing to have a look at that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good note on which to end this webinar. And I think Mervyn, as the CEO of the ACTOM Group, has made the point very well, that you know, the employment opportunities are there throughout the lifetime of the plant, and it's really about the customer. It's about you know, it's not about actually about the manufacturer. It's about the customer, whether the customer, you know, is the public of South Africa, the economy of South Africa. That's what it actually is all about, and ultimately this all has to serve the customer in its widest context. And the customer is not only supported at the point of manufacture, supported throughout the whole life cycle. And there are also significant jobs throughout the whole life cycle of this equipment. And we cannot neglect ongoing maintenance. We've seen the results of neglect of maintenance in many sectors, including the electricity sector. And it's really penny wise and pound foolish to skimp on jobs, you know, through the life cycle of projects and plants and equipment. So I think I want to just thank our four presenters: Danielle Harding, Wilma Muller, Casper Zwane, Gayla Mason-Claire. It's been a great discussion. I've enjoyed it. I think I've learned a lot. I hope I've put challenging questions to you, and I think you've certainly answered them very well. And I really thank you for your time and effort. And Gaylo, I'm really looking forward to that document coming out in the next few weeks. We'll be keeping our eyes open for it, and I will hopefully be spreading the word and making sure that people know about it and are encouraged to comment on it and respond to it, because as you've said, it's an absolutely critical document that gets to the very heart of the discussions today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to all those who attended. Thank you to ACTOM for facilitating. Thank you to Minx and the SAIEE for the platform and for for organizing this. And I look forward to seeing you again at another venue and place and time. All the best.
Thank you. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.